Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So I came across this video on X/Twitter, and it was really insightful in terms of what the future of warfare will look like. It appeared to be a Ukrainian drone taking out a Russian soldier, from my understanding. Or it could be the opposite, but from what I gathered, that it was that. So forgive me if it turns out to be not the case. But either way, it's footage of that war, right? Some things that have occurred. And it's not the first drone assassination that I've watched. And in this particular video, I took some screenshots of it. He's tired and exhausted. And it's this strange little drone that looks just like the kind that you would see at the park. It's just floating just like this, and then he looks around exhausted. He sees it and he does like his hands like a prayer hand, and then all of a sudden it takes him out, right? And what really got to me is the secular liberal atheists in America who say, Muslims are barbarians. They are often the ones praising artificial intelligence and robotics, and a lot of their organizations that are godless are making machines of war. And so it is funny to me when people pretend that if atheists just took over, there'd be no more war, there'd be no more horror. And it's fascinating that if there's men fighting each other on the battlefield, that's barbaric and primitive. You have to be above it, and you're more sophisticated if you use a drone on your enemy, because it's technology, right? It's progress in the field of war. Now, I thought even deeper about why do secular atheists hate the Second Amendment so much in America? Why? What really bothers them about it? Because if you care about women, why would you take away their tools that can defend their lives? If you care about the working man, why would you take away the weapon that helps him to defend his family from criminals? Why? Why would you do that? Now, if you had a 12 gauge, you could take out that tiny drone. Firearms can take down drones. Some of them, at least. So, if our military and our leaders are becoming more and more godless and turning more and more to AI, and drones are becoming part of the American war machine as well, wouldn't it stand to reason that eventually drones would be used on our soil against us, right? So, if every citizen is disarmed, they're not allowed to have a firearm, and the government decides to really crack down on religion, kind of like how the Jacobins did to the Catholics in France, how many priests were oppressed, we would definitely see, oh no, there's two squirrels fighting. I feed the squirrels and they're fighting over the bread. It would be highly irregular to assume that it's all going to be peace and cookies with the liberal atheists in power. And when the Jacobins had their reign of terror, we see how that is when you have an atheistic creed and you really dislike religion. Communism in and of itself is not a religion and does not favor the religious masses. And they still had to use weapons of war and wage war. The fascists and the communists still had to have weapons. Okay? Humans have to have war in order to defend territories. That's the only way it'll work. You can be the good guys, that doesn't mean bad guys are not going to try to take what you have. So the pacifist, we're just going to lay down and we'll give you bowls of grapes and you won't hurt us, It's just not true, and that doesn't defend women and children and the elderly. And so, when we see an empire become more and more hedonistic, sinful, corrupt, and they start to strip people of tools that would defend themselves against drones, well, we can see that would be a big problem. And further, there's already been hints at this in like the Black Mirror episode where Boston Dynamics dog has been deployed, or was deployed on a character. And with the Neuralink chips that Elon Musk is doing, anything that's like has a signal can be like tracked and traced, like your cell phone. If you can be tracked on that, an internal body chip, it's only a matter of time. And there's already chips that can help to locate you, which are put into animals. And so, if a drone just attaches to your chip, it can find you easily. And the government, we know now, is not a moral entity. And, excuse me, I would argue that since they're not based in religion, they can't ever really be moral. Because how can a godless government rule in such a way that would lead to some type of religious ethics, religious decorum? And with the weaknesses that come with the secular liberal atheist system, you need only hijack it by constantly revising what it is you believe in. So one leader comes in, they do all these changes, there isn't the strict system, and then another person comes in, checks it all out. You know, you're constantly deviating, and you don't have this set system. And the Constitution, it doesn't allow you to be put under a cruel punishment. No cruel and unusual punishment. Was that the Bill of Rights or the Constitution? I don't remember. But that's when you've been set on a jury by your peers. That's a different thing in war. And so it is fascinating when you hear just this real push for AI, for women to have robots, men to have robots, artificial wombs, artificial reality, and then drones coming in a war. And basically watching someone lose their life due to a drone is very like, wow, that's intense. And what's fascinating truly, you'll see, because suicide is haram in Islam. You're not allowed to do that, okay? I've shared the hadith. Not even supposed to be allowed to long for death, okay? But it's fascinating that the liberal atheists will get very upset that a bomber will do that, and it is wrong, right? They'll say, oh, you hurt all these innocent people. But then they make drones that take people out very strategically, very ruthlessly. And all they gotta do is be like, oh, engage, and it just finds them. That's, wow, like that's intense. Pretty intense. And so, if we see empires getting this capacity to have drones in their warfare, we must look at the moral compass of those nations and what do they represent and what do they fight for. So, it's time that Christians and Muslims really analyze, you know, what does the American flag represent today? Is the atheistic and liberal creed sufficient to curtail such war crimes? And further, as atheism spreads, and without God everything is permissible, and the atheists stand by and allow the Palestinians to kind of be the stomping grounds of what's going to be allowed to happen to people in mass, collective punishment. So as we watch collective punishment and just total land grabs, and then we see the drones being used in Ukraine, and in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, we can see how they're testing our capacity for suffering as onlookers. Like, oh, well, that's over there, that's not here. Meanwhile, the secular liberal atheists in America have Prop 42, which allows people to do theft and not be jailed under a certain amount of money. And then you see businesses try to put things behind glass and plastic, and they try to put cameras on workers. Still doesn't do anything because the district attorneys let them loose. So lawlessness has increased because of the secular liberal atheists. Their godlessness is really out there and handicapping, kneecapping, slicing the Achilles heel of what fortifies us as a nation, which is to be a religious and moral society. Now, what's even more creepy is that the secular liberal atheists are also showing us how they rule when it even comes to babies, how they are making excuses for men to try to allow newborns to suckle on them. A man can't make milk for a baby, so the child is being actually abused. They're being used as a prop in a pleasure for a mentally deranged man. And liberals demand, secular liberal atheists demand, that religious people don't save and rescue those babies who are being used as a sexual object to those pure degenerates. And they want you to lose your job. They want you to be harmed if you don't accept that. And they put their flag everywhere, even on government buildings, to let you know who's the new faith in town, who's the new religion in town. And they fly it oftentimes above the American flag. And notice this. They want to draft women, right? Feminists calling women equal, telling women to act like men. And instead of us, like me, I would do absolutely anything to defend my children. Anything. My community, like, if there was an invasion and there's a war and you gotta throw down and stand now, you can't retreat, things are gonna get pretty dark. And may Allah never make me have to do that, but I'm sure plenty of moms have that capacity in them as well. Now, that doesn't mean I think women should go into the meat grinder. Okay? Doesn't mean I think that banker wars and the elites should leech off of our tax money as all the good men go for proxy wars. But to pretend the secular atheists are more humane is false. Because with the advent of the drones used in warfare, well, just like when gunpowder was really coming along, we saw how things changed, didn't we? And so it's very important for people to really assess what is war, when should you fight, and to know that if you die for your country, you're fighting for the current values, not what you think 17th century people said. Because what the values of those in the 17th century were are not the values of today, regardless of if you find a handful in Texas who have MAGA hats and say this is what it's all about. The bureaucrats in their tall skyscrapers, on their private yachts and their private helicopters, they're the ones who get to tell you, what your country is about. And so, if you want to go watch that video, I do recommend it just to make you think about the hereafter and to really examine why it's so important that Muslims understand their rights in America concerning the Second Amendment, because you're a U.S. citizen, you have a right to that. But you should be very aware how the secular liberal atheists promote thug music, rap music, and promote the decriminalization of all drugs. So libertarians do as well, that you should legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs since you're not harming anyone but yourself. And so the liberal atheist wants to push drugs, which makes people mentally insane, while pushing music that has a degenerate, violent, spiritual effect on the people who listen to it, and then they push broken homes and mock people for being virgins till marriage, or they hate polygamy but they like open marriages and cuckoldry, but they don't like a man to have multiple wives. And so everything they touch, it gets inverted and ruined, because all they do is destroy and invert. And so the phrase that came to mind while watching that video was, there's no atheists in a foxhole. And sure, maybe there's some people who think they're just going to be worm food, that's it, and right when the breath of death is up their nostrils, they hold firm to that. But there is no denying how there's this compulsion for people to seek help in the moment of great fear. And it's sad, truly, that Zelensky, and people used to get banned and censored over, saying that Ukraine should just surrender and the United States should stop giving our tax dollars to them to fund a losing war. And now you're a little bit more free to say, hey, this is a bit too much money. But knowing that there are so many people out there losing their lives to the atheist-created drone, it's really sad. It's quite sad. And the liberal atheists have no problem wanting to take in the women, because to them a woman isn't necessarily anything special to be protected and guarded. They argue that Islam is bad because it doesn't let a woman walk around nude in the street. But at the same time, they push brothel culture and drugs, and music that glorifies debauchery and behaviors that are self-destructive. And then they want to get you into the military so that a drone that they invented just goes splatterly splat with you. Where in Islam, it says men are in charge of women, and men have to be willing to engage in jihad and to defend the faith, religion, and the Muslim community. And then atheists will hate that, but then they'll invent drones and say, well, it's totally fine to take out as many targets as long as you win the war. The ends justify the means. And the ends justify the means is not an Islamic thing, from my understanding, from what I've heard people say. That's like more of a communistic angle. Almost even a Freemason one as well. So, when you live your life in a more spiritual way, I think you have more reverence for human life. But if you're an atheist, what's the point of life really? What's to stop you? Because you don't have the fear of your maker. And when someone has zero fear of their actions, that it can evoke really countless darkness in people. That's why films like The Purge and other dystopian type of cinema touch on a deep nature, because we know if people really believed that they could do whatever they want without any spiritual repercussions in the next life, well, then all that would have to do is just to ignore the legislature, the judiciary. Tons of criminals already break the laws concerning the secular government's rules. So, when someone is God-fearing, they behave differently. And further, in war, the humanness, you're like, oh, I need to spare this person, or something comes out. But a drone carries out the operation logically. And some atheists, they really do favor pure logic. And pure logic is not going to hear your plea. It's going to carry out what it was ordered to do in a very cold-blooded manner. And so, think about it. Secular liberal atheists still are waging wars. Okay, they still want your kids to go into that meat grinder. And so it's quite bizarre how they will say that Islam is a barbaric religion, while at the same time having domestic policies that create more criminals and dismember more babies via abortion and lead to more production of military drones. So they speak out of both sides of their mouth. It's watch this hand, but no, don't watch the other. Very intense. And I don't share the video because that's how a lot of people get you with copyright claims or whatever. Even though it's totally fair use, I just don't think it's worth the risk. But it's in a sequence to where you can pretty much see what happened. And you see the human exhaustion when you're trying to outrun a drone. It's intense. I saw a video where a bald eagle, and then I saw another one where a hawk took down a drone, but we don't got too many of those to help us if someone sends that. I also saw the Chinese Communist government have the exact same DARPA dogs with a automatic weapon attached on top that they are using in their military. So even if Western countries don't use those weapons, other people will as well. And so war is an ever expanding empire. It's existed for a long time. So you have to examine the ethics of those who are waging the wars and what's their ultimate end, and if whatever side wins, what does victory look like, and whatever side loses, what does that loss look like. And so the Ukrainian-Russian wars, it's pretty messed up. You know how many lives have been lost. But I think it's also important if you're gonna vote and you say, oh, men don't matter, society doesn't really need men are toxic. Okay, are you gonna send your genderqueer person out there, your cross-dressing friend out there? Some might go, but it's a deadly thing. For the most part, it's straight men. And if you have a masculine, handsome, heterosexual son, he could be masculine without going into the military. And with the rise of globalization and global orders and nationalism breaking down, I think you will see a different type of oppression in the future, where it'll just be the globalists versus the peasants, us, instead of like Spain versus Portugal or France versus England. Like, you're not gonna, I think that whole thing will break down because it won't be as important, because there's been so much immigration that the ethnicities of the countries are just very altered. So they'll just use artificial intelligence and drones, social credit scores, and microchips to kind of really usher in the new order that they want. And I think you already saw a hint of that when it came to vaccine passports, because they didn't even want you to be allowed on a plane, and today they are totally fine. They hired back all those pilots that they fired, and everything's just back to normal pretty much. But they tested the grounds to see how much would the people allow. And so it's about time that people stop pretending that secular liberal atheists are pacifist, peace-loving hippies who don't engage in bloodshed and can be trusted with the keys to the world. I would argue that their system is flawed from top to bottom, and you can tell that by every blue city that they've been in charge of in America, and how small businesses have had to flee, how California has some of the worst housing, problems, tons of gangs, lawlessness, car shows just randomly in the streets. It's just a really sad situation. So Philadelphia and California, amongst other places, they're not doing too well. So when manufacturing jobs were taken away, and now just commonplace jobs are being taken away by artificial intelligence, you'll see they'll have less reason to keep you around. And Nova Harari even said that as well. There's no need to have as many humans. And then when you find out that a lot of secular atheists are eugenicists with a god complex and think that they have the keys to human destiny and that they get to just engineer you like a piglet, well, then you're going to find out exactly what they think about you. Whereas in Islam, we humans, we are not just something to be managed like parasites, but rather we are slaves of Allah, and we're here to worship Him, to combat evil, to enjoy what is good, have families, and to spread Islamic monotheism, which includes prayer, charity, Hajj, and all the rest. An atheist can just make it up as they go. And that's a pretty scary thing, because you don't know what the next guy is coming in with. It's not a set in stone system. And therefore the next crackpot who's off his meds can come in and just create a lot of chaos. And a piece of paper constitution is not going to stop someone like that. Whereas when someone has religion, they try to stick within the boundaries of their faith. Let me know what you think. And do you have a family member who was a veteran? Did you have anyone who you lost in the war? And what do you think the ruling should be on drones and warfare? Can there be any rulings? Who knows? Israel has proved time and time again that certain laws only apply to certain countries and not others. So the UN is not even a real thing at this point. It's just a facade. Something to think about. If you'd like to join my blog and support my work, you can do so by going to www.subscribestar.com/Milahan Archive. Hope to see you there. Subhanallah. Such a beauty.